Hamas will be eradicated as a military force that can threaten Israelis and will be eradicated as a political force ruling in Gaza. And when we will have indications that that has been done is not clear. Yesterday, the Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant restated that victory would be, for example, when Israelis, more than 300,000 of whom are displaced, right? In the south and in the north, Israelis have been evacuated from their homes when they're still alive. And so the fact, what the defense minister said is that when they'll be able to go home and they won't have to worry about air raid sirens, there will be no missile threats against them, that will be victory.
Noga, let me start with what is the current state of affairs in Jerusalem? I can see you're out and about in the streets. What's the atmosphere like?
Well, I would say, as you can tell, it's sort of empty, and at the same time, it's very tense. You caught me as I'm heading over to join, I don't know how many thousands of family members of Israeli hostages, friends, and supporters who have been marching for the last 5 days from Tel Aviv, where the Israeli Defense Ministry is, to the Prime Minister's office in Jerusalem. They're expected in about half an hour. And it's going to be one of the most pointed and I think one of the most painful protests against the Israeli government by Israeli citizens who are desperate for any piece of news and any sign of life from their loved ones who were taken from their homes and kidnapped on October 7th and taken to Gaza by Hamas.
Noga, I want to ask you about some comments that were made by the former Prime Minister yesterday. Ehud Olmert was quoted as saying, Khan Yunis, which is in the southern part of the Gaza Strip, is the real headquarters of Hamas, which of course then begs the question of why Gaza City has been almost flattened completely. We've got this focus on the Al-Shifa hospital. If Israeli officials are so certain that actually the Hamas headquarters are in the southern part of Gaza, then what has been going on so far?
I don't think Israeli officials feel that at all. With all due respect to the former prime minister who hasn't been in power for, 15 or 18 years, and I do have respect for him, I think that is the case for when he was in power.
Right.
I think this, which is in southern Gaza, really was the headquarters, of Hamas activity at the time, but we have not heard any questioning at all, not just in the last month and a half of war, but in the last several years. I would say that Hamas consolidated its power in northern Gaza, in fact, in Gaza City, which was, you could say, a shrewd or a dangerous decision on its part. It's, by far the largest city and the most prosperous city in all of Gaza. And they made a bet on establishing themselves there, thinking that this would save them. And it worked for quite a long time. And since the attack of October 7th, it has no longer worked.
And Noga, what about the attitude within Israel about the ongoing bombing in Gaza? You were saying you're on your way in this march. The people who are hugely concerned about the hostages, that is their top priority. They want to see those people returned safely. Is there a concern that the longer, we are 6 weeks into this conflict right now, that the longer this goes on, the more images emerge in the state of Gaza and the destruction going on there? Is there a concern, not just within the Israeli government, but the Israeli people, that sympathy from outside of Israel is going to start to wane?
Yes, although I think it's even much wider and more deep than what you're describing. In other words, there is, of course, within Israel reports of, is patience running out? The new U.S. ambassador to Israel was asked this. The head of the, Josep Borrell, who heads the Foreign Affairs Department for the EU, has been asked this. But I think it's much more complex. Israelis are aware of this, but much more what you see are Israelis among themselves really deeply torn apart. In other words, I don't think you'd find many Israelis who disagree with the point of view that says that Hamas needs to be eradicated, that the terror attack of October 7th is something that the Israeli state cannot live with and the Israeli people cannot live with, right? 1,200 people murdered in a single attack. That said, the Israeli argument thus far has failed to make the case that the bombing and the terrible cost in Gaza is getting them anything. We have not seen reports of the death of any of the really top level of Hamas leaders in Gaza, which is something that I think is important for many Israelis in the context of seeing Hamas eliminated as a military threat. And much worse, there have been no hostages released. And in the last day and a half, I think it's important to say, 4 of the hostages taken from Israel by Hamas have been reported dead, credibly reported dead. Hamas has released a video of one elderly hostage who was taken dead. The Tanzanian government reported on the death of a 22-year-old, a kid, a student who was studying agriculture in southern Israel at a very fine university. He was taken hostage. He's been killed. And an Israeli soldier called Noa Marciano and a 64-year-old woman called Judith Weiss, who was a cancer patient. The Israeli army said clearly that she was murdered by Hamas and she was taken hostage. So what we're facing is an Israeli public that is confused, that is worried, that is fearful, and these thousands of family members who are starting to fear that their hopes to see their loved ones again may be dashed.
Noga, has the Israeli government or the IDF described what victory would look like? Of course, the whole premise of this has been the eradication of Hamas. But as you pointed there in what you were saying, has there been any indication of the progress? The number of Hamas fighters taken out of action, the number of Hamas leaders taken out of action. What does victory look like? Because from the rest of the world, perhaps, is waiting, looking at the atrocities that are happening, the tragic loss of life everywhere, and saying, yes, but there is a purpose behind that, which is the eradication of Hamas. And if we don't have a measure by which this operation is succeeding, then you can appreciate how people are saying, well, where is this going to end?
I not only appreciate it, I live it daily here among Israelis who are asking exactly the same questions. The Israeli government has not made clear what, precisely would be the aims of this war. Now, on the one hand, I have to say, I don't know which war, especially one launched in a surprise attack like this one, has, kind of like scientifically clearly articulated goals. What the Israeli people have been told is that Hamas will be eradicated as a military force that can threaten Israelis and will be eradicated as a political force ruling in Gaza. And when we will have indications that that has been done is not clear. Yesterday, the Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant restated that victory would be, for example, when Israelis, more than 300,000 of whom are displaced, right? In the south and in the north, Israelis have been evacuated from their homes when they're still alive. And so what the defense minister said is that when they'll be able to go home and they won't have to worry about air raid sirens, there will be no missile threats against them, that will be victory. But that's kind of one description, and it's a partial description. And one of the reasons that you see an Israeli public that is so fearful, so kind of feverish, so lacking in confidence in its government is because these things have absolutely not been made clear. I'd like to emphasize also that while Israelis seem pretty unified in their support of the goal of eradicating Hamas, whatever that may mean, and let's say it means that it will no longer pose a military threat to Israel, 4%, in a poll published this week, 4% of Israelis feel that their prime minister is a trustable source on matters related to this war. So the Israeli public really feels unmoored and at a loss.
Noga, it's always great to speak to you. Thank you so much for giving us all this time. Stay safe, and I hope we speak soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Noga Tarnopolsky there speaking to us from Jerusalem.